Whew. Welcome, everybody, to the classroom of blood and sand and knowledge. As you can see, I've got myself some teaching implements here with me, your host, the King. Today's lesson is going to be about cutting implements, namely inverse curves and outward curves, and how they've benefited slicing and dicing for centuries, really. We're going to start off with a real simple little lesson on inverse versus outward, and then we're going to move on to some of the more complexities. So, as you can see right here, this is a Falx. It is the best slicer and dicer the Thracians ever made, and was so deadly that the Romans had to actually make specific troops just to fight it, because the inverse curve forced it into the cut, meaning that all that weight had nowhere to go but into the slice. Now, this did lead to a downside where it would get stuck in the opponent, but the continued curve of the handle allowed one to easily pull it back out and go in for another chop. These things were known to chop Roman spathas, which, similar in design to this tower shield, cut it clean down to the central boss, which they held it here in the center, but if they'd had an armrest up there like these modern tower shields, their arm would be severed in half. This thing was nasty. Now, from the other side of the world, the wakazashis and katanas, the most infamous outward curved blades you'll ever see, other than maybe sabers and shamshirs, as I think I was pronounced, from the eras of Arabia and Japan, or the locations of Arabia and Japan. Now we're going to go to single edge, and that's a saber. Here we go. Shamshir, yes. Spawn. These are some glorious outward curved blades. Now, outward curve, unlike an inward curve, did not pull itself into the cut, instead pushed off the cut, allowing, instead of cleaving, for slicing. Slicing was nice because you had a lot less chance of getting stuck in your opponent and a lot more chance of being able to come back with another cut. Swift slicey slices. Alright, so those are just two aspects of the same coin there. One goes in, the other comes back out. But both were designed to cut and specialized against unarmored opponents. Say it with me. Unarmored opponents. Reason being, if they were armored opponents, you stood a high chance of getting stuck in their armor or of not being able to pen. Just sent that thing to Brazil because I'm going to use this one to denote the slicey dices. Now, we're going to move on to my teaching aids here for a second while I go over the different types of cleaving and cutting curves. So we're going to start with this end. This is a war scythe. Kind of like the Rumphila, which was the polearm version of the Falx, it had an inverse curve, meaning that when you brought it down on somebody, their body would be pushed into that curve, much like a grain of wheat. See how it catches on the wood there? And that would leave it with nowhere to go but through. Now, to generate even more force than the Falx was able to give them, they mounted it on a long pole, giving them leverage on their swings. This thing was so nasty on the battlefield. There's another variant of it used by the English. See, that was usually used by peasantry. It was a scythe where the blade was straightened. There was actually a pole. Oh, don't tell me they put it in axe. Yes, they did. All right. So this is the bill. It was an axe. I don't know why it was an axe. The forest bill. See that? You see that long curve? I'm gonna just work my way up here to the top. See this inverse curve here? This would be used to pull riders off their horse, as well, as sever limbs. It was a nasty bit of work that had smaller surface area than the war scythe, but as you could see, a much thicker, hardier construction, and, frankly put, significant reach compared. Anyways, significantly more reach. This thing was wonderful against cavalry because they'd be riding by and you just hook them and rip them down off their horse with that gut right, their gut right on that hook. Ooh. Ow, shit. And to Brazil. So, next on the docket, this bad boy, the Ram Dao. This was made by Hindus, if I remember correctly. And the curve here of the blade, again, acting like an inverse curve for the Falks, but the actual round tip worked more like an axe head, all right, to push the flesh on either side down into this curve, allowing it to slice deep. But if you cut their head in this little bevel, it's coming right off because of all this weight on the other side of the cut, pulling it through. This was a nasty weapon. I've used it a few times here in the arena, in our wonderful classroom, and it never fails to impress. I get head, decapitations like you would not believe with this thing, as long as I can get their neck right there in that curve. It is a nasty bit of work. Next up on the docket, the longsword. The longsword is infamous for being the sword of knights and soldiers across time, especially this two-handed to hand-and-a-half variant. Now, its cutting edge is actually not one of the greatest for an inverse or an outward curve, instead relying on a taper and its own weight chopping down. Now, the sword was decently heavy, not remarkably heavy. It's not like it's unwieldy, oh, my arm. But its own weight coming down, as well as a draw slash, allowed the length and taper of the blade to inflict pretty devious cuts, even though it doesn't use a curve. Now, because it didn't use a curve, this weapon was also great at thrusting, which I will cover in our next episode in detail. So we'll get to that in its own time. Just know that the straight swords are wonderful multi-tools on the battlefield. Next up is axes, like these two. These bad boys use an outward curve, but not in the same way that our Shamshir here does. Instead of being a slicing drawing weapon, this pushes itself into the flesh, pushing the flesh apart, up and down into the sides to hack into the body. The longer the handle, the more hack one can acquire. Meaning that axes, due to all their weight being right here in the head, and all of that weight being driven forward onto this cutting curve, meant that these guys were wonderful at chopping through chainmail, wonderful at chopping through plate mail, wonderful at getting through brigandines, which are like layers and layers and layers of cloth, like hundreds of layers of cloth all smooshed together and sewn really tight. They were armor destroyers. That's why Vikings loved them. They were very little metal, very easy to make, and they did a wonderful job at cracking shields, cracking heads, and breaking armor because of that nice curve. A flat-bladed axe would not be anywhere as effective. Next, we get into something that's both axe and sword. Whoop. Thank you. This is the Ikakalaka from Africa. Its straight blade implies nice chopping potential, but when you get up here to the top, there's this beautiful acute inverse curve here that allows it to hook the flesh and slice right through, much like the tip of our Ram Dao here. All right. Nope, I didn't mean to draw you. I'm trying to point. There we go. Much like the curve of the Ram Dao here. It gets right up into that little curve and then just slice, behead, chop, because this was actually meant for ceremonial beheadings. Now, the tip of this sword, if I could grip the blade, there we go, just grab onto it with my middle finger there, there we go. The tip of this sword is bladed, much like our axe heads here. If I grab my Norse axe here, it's a little sharper, granted, a little sharper than your typical axe head, but that's because the tip of this sword was meant for a chopping thrust. If I have this blade, I can jab with it and leave a cut. It's not going to be a devastating cut. It's going to be more of a blunt cut, more of like a oof, and it'd be only effective really against unarmored opponents. Against an armored opponent, it's not going to do a whole lot of damage. But what really makes it devastating is on a downward thrust. I'm driving that large wedge into somebody with a two-handed boom. That is going to do nasty, nasty damage because it'll make a very wide cut, which is very difficult to heal. We've already covered axe heads. Now we're going to cover a acute curve in the opposite direction. Instead of an inverse, an acute outward curve, or an obtuse curve, here on our naginata. The naginata, for those of you who don't know, was used by Japan to sever horses' legs or to take the rider off the back. And these swords, while having, well, not sword, this polearm, this glaive, while having a mostly straight body, here has a wonderful curve here on the blade that right here at the end curves very sharply. So this weapon could not be used to stab, but if I can walk around it here, that sharp curve meant that on a slice, if you caught someone with just the tip, it could inflict a very grievous, sharp, deep cut at the end. All right, not a stabbing weapon, but definitely one of the top-notch slicing weapons of its day. Definitely one of the top-notch slicing weapons. On the theme of taking out cavalry, we have one more, the cavalry saber. And no, it was not used by horses, it was used to take out horses. This blade, everything about it is designed to slice. So, on the outward blade, the part you'd use against most of the enemy, you've got this sharp point here for driving through chainmail, driving through a gambeson, pushing it on the outward sides of this curve. Not going to do a whole lot of pen damage, but enough to cause a bleed. The straight blade here, good for any same slice as our longsword. The waves, though, would act like serrets. And for anyone who doesn't know what a serret is, here's an image. Thank you. These serrets would slice and tear and rip like teeth, but without being as fragile as actual serrations. And then this backwards curve. I know you're all asking, what the fuck is that for? Well, if I could just get my sword to quit bouncing around. There we go. When a horse was going by, you could hook the horse or hook the rider with that and pull them down off the horse the same way the billhook and the war scythe were able to. The same way that the back end of our naginata could drive someone down. That hook was for pulling riders down or for catching a horse's leg. Right in this little inverse curve, this acute inverse, the horse's leg would hit it and just chop. If you were strong enough, that is. You could just take a leg clean off with that curve. It was a nasty bit of work. Now, you wonder why? Well, I've never seen this sword before. Yep, Cavalry Slayer, not Saber. Cavalry Slayer. Now, for those of you going, well, I've never seen this sword in any historical thing before. If it was so deadly, why didn't I see more of it? Kind of a niche weapon. Not gonna lie. Kind of a niche weapon. Not an uber common weapon, because the actual blacksmithery that had to go into this puppy was immense. So, yeah. Next, I'm going to go on to some daggers that all do a wonderful job of the slicey the dicey. First up, needs no introduction, a karambit. You've all played CSGO, you've all seen one of these fuckers before. You probably wonder, well, Jake, what's with the raptor claw? Well, that is so that when it cuts, this will pierce and it'll slide to the inside curve, much like our Falks, except with a dagger, and you're pulling it across like this. It'll slide through. A lot like when your scissors hit just right on that wrapping paper and they just kind of glide. Yeah, same effect. But the back is also sharpened, so you have those back slices, those quick slashes that aren't going to get stuck into the body, that aren't going to get dug in there. They're surface slashes for slicing the neck or for doing surface damage to arms, maybe take someone's knife out of their hand. And then that sharp tip right there where the two meet, great for just pen and push or pen and pull. Absolute nasty weapon. Next up, the kukuri. A wonderful curve, a lot like our Falks. Inverse curve for the chop, not slash, chop. All the weight is here at the end, here at the tip of this kukuri, meaning that when it hits, all that weight is hitting right there. Boom. Just hacking through your opponent, taking a limb off, taking a head off, taking a leg off. But they used the kukuri for more than just war. The kukuri was actually a utility knife. meant for chopping meat up, chopping wood pieces apart. It was just the all everyday chopper, cutting your lawn. This thing was just meant for that swing and slash, and its weight made the job so much easier because it would just carry itself through the cut. Not really a good stabber because the weight is the tip is offset from the wrist, so when you hit, you risk it folding upwards because you're pushing, but you're pushing below the point where it meets. So it's going to tilt. It's going to angle. Boom. See? My guy's wrist goes forward because the weight that I'm pushing with is off. So, yeah, it doesn't even stick. Oh, Jesus. There we go. Next up on the docket. Get back here, you little shit. You are coming to show and tell. Much like a cavalry saver's waves, this is called a kris, and it was used famously in Kali, which is knife fighting, which later became eskrima, using sticks when their weapons were taken away by, I believe, the Japanese. Anywho, the waves of the blade allow slices on the draws, slashes, to do way more damage because, again, they act like serrations, which, again, look like this. Thank you. That also means that on the thrust, it's going to inflict a wider cut because it's going to wobble on its way in, it's going to inflict a wider cut. This thing was all about making them bleed. It was a real nasty bit of work, real beautiful weapon, actually. If you look at the way the handle guard sweeps back, so that way, when you catch a blade, the front will stop it, but say, you get hit in the back of the hand, it'll get caught on that guard there. Instead of being channeled into your wrist, it'll skip over your wrist and hit your armor that you're wearing, keeping you pretty damn well protected. At first, I never saw the thing. I thought it would always hit my wrist when I folded my hand up, Probably should have thrown that away just yet. But it doesn't. It's so well fitted to the hand that it's not going to jab you in the wrist unless you're like super flexible. Next one is another dagger that was repurposed. So this beautiful thing is actually a peasant's weapon, right? It's like incredibly ornate. Let me just float this puppy for a second. Look at the ornate design on this. This is the cinqueta, I think. Yes, cinqueta. It stands for the five-fingered fuller, which fullers are all these little divots you see here in the metal. All right? Each one of those is meant to make the weapon lighter. That way it can be a big hunk of steel, but not be as heavy as a big hunk of steel. Now, this dagger was actually widened this way, which reduced its stabbing potential, but we'll get to that later. It made it a much better chopper because, again, this is not a weapon of war. It doesn't need to pierce armor. It needed to chop meat, chop, wood, needed to cut things, much like our kukuri. It needed to hack its way through whatever the heck you need to hack through. And when in times of need, this was a wonderful weapon of war for the Roman people, who would use it to defend their towns, their wives, their loved ones, their everything. To Brazil with you. That's going to come right back down, isn't it? Once the imbuement wears off. Oh boy. So that's it for those kind of weapons. Next up comes the weapons I got on my body, which you haven't seen except for one. This bad boy. The falchion. The falchion was a razor's thin weapon at the blade, going straight back to a very thin back. If I could just go into this very thin back here. And because of that, this weapon was marvelous at chopping through things, just bringing the weight here at the end down real hard on whatever you were swinging at. Wasn't so good against things like chainmail or things like plate mail. But again, most of these hacky slashy weapons, not meant for chainmail. They were meant for leather armor. They were meant for brigandines. They were not meant for chainmail. They were not meant for plate mail. They were not meant for lamlar armor. Some scale mail. These weapons were meant to take out mostly unarmored opponents. or lightly armored opponents. The falchion was infamous for being used against, oh, that is still up there, being infamously used against bandits who usually lived in the forest and had at most a brigandine, which doubled as a winter coat. Okay? This thing was like a peasant's worst nightmare if the barons sent them after you, because they'd take your freaking limb right off. This thing's just a meat cleaver with a sword handle. There's another type of weapon like the falchion called the messer, which is very similar in make and model, a little less weight and a little more knife-like. It's essentially if you took a Bowie knife and just made it into a sword. Let me, you know what? Nope, shit. Let me just show you one real quick. Because they're another beautiful weapon. Beautiful, beautiful weapon. Here we go, Langsmacer. Yeah, see, it's like a Bowie knife got turned into a sword. It's a real long, real straight blade with a good curve at the top here. This good curve allows for that slashing motion, while here at the weight of the blade allows for that good hack. This was a nice weapon of war. This little ring guard, see, it's meant to be worn on the right. That little ring guard helps cover the hand. Nice of you to join us. That little ring guard allows it to cover the hand. So it's minimalistic in design, very knife-like, because the actual term Messer means knife in German. All right, Langsmesser just means a long knife. So yeah, very much suiting its function. And to Brazil. So, there you go. On this shoulder, I've got Egypt's answer to the battle axe meets sword dilemma. How do I get through the armor like an axe, but be wieldable like a sword? The Khopesh. This little dip here acts for a nice catch hook, much like the bottoms of axes would. The bottoms of axes. While this dip on the back was great, again, for that catch, pull, and then coming back. So I'm going to go over here to our shield here. They would hook that little divot on it, pull the shield out of the way, and then come back at you with that blade. Boom, boom. Now, because this broad curve here, very similar to this bad boy, as you can see there, that broad curve was wonderful for the chop. Real wonderful at it, but also facilitated decent slicing draw motions. Honestly, a beautiful weapon made by the highly intelligent Egyptians of the time, which helped them spread their empire against other people who didn't have nearly as beautiful bronze work or as ingenious sword design. And on my other shoulder, a different type of axe from what you're seeing there. Yes, it's double-bladed. I know double-bladed axes were not traditionally used in warfare. They're more or less just pleasing to the eye. But this axe, the reason I'm bringing it up is the actual shape of the blade, not how many blades it has. So we're just going to levitate it for a moment. These upper curves are very similar to the curves we're seeing on our other axes. But down here at the I got burps. Down here at the bottom, though, we're seeing a beautiful thing happen where it pushes upwards and outwards, much like the bottoms of our falks or the acute angles on our ramdo, our war scythe. So if you were to hit with this nape here, it would actually push it up and into the bigger... Wow, I can just move you around, can't I? That's really nice. I thought you'd just keep floating away. So anywho, it pushes it into those curves coming around. And, oh, get back here. No, I need you to stay floating just a little bit longer. I'm almost done with you, I swear. So, oh, see, now it's moving all over the place. So it moves it into those curves, allowing it to push the meat up and around. So even if you hit early on this axe, you're still digging into the best part of the cutting edge, meaning that your force is not wasted at all, no matter what part of this blade you hit with. And should you actually hit with the big bell end here, you're still driving the entire weight of this axe into the cut. God damn it. This axe literally cannot go wrong with how it is shaped and modeled. It is a beautiful cutting edge designed for beautiful bad things. Now comes the end of my demonstration or the end of our lesson, wonderful kitties and girls. We are going to demonstrate a bit of what I have talked about today. Now, real quick, before I open that, I need to check my notes. I'm going to turn that on. We don't want that ruined. All right. We don't want no substitutes ruining our little presentation. We're going to start with this bad boy, the Slicey Dicey Champion. And we have a volunteer. So he swings, I come in for the counter, boom, see surface level cut, but my sword didn't get stuck. It carried through his body. See, it comes across him. Again, the cuts aren't very deep because the sword is quite light, but the fact that I can come back with more cuts means that I can keep swinging. Now that I caught him perfectly. As you can see, that last cut, I hit him right here and it pushed the cutting edge across his body. You can actually see the uneven cut there where it hit, went down and got pushed clean through, resulting in that nasty cut. See, I hit him in the back, pushed down and through as the sword drew across, resulting in the decap here. That is some nasty work. But that is a beautiful demonstration of what made this weapon a must-have across most of the Middle East. Now let's just get rid of our assistant. Send him on a nice vacation to Brazil. Alright, next up, the Falchion, the Peasant Slayer. Now, the reason I'm doing this against gladiators is because they are unarmored, and it gives me the best representation of how slashing weapons were meant to be used. Now, as you can see, I took his head clean off in a single strike. I hit him once across the face. You can see it here on his upper face. That is a nasty, deep cut. You can tell by all the red, which is, you know... Oh, just dropped it. Hold on. You can tell by all the striations around the cut and by the tearing. That was deep. But the beheading was what I really want to talk about. Because, again, a nice 2-bit cut here. But, man, did that look like it hurt. I just took it clean off because I hit it with the widest part of the saber. You can see there on my falchion. I hit him right there at the heaviest part, and it just went right through like butter. Let's get rid of our assistant. All right. Next up on the docket, the Khopesh. Another nasty weapon. And she's already done. Is she? I don't think she's done. Now she's done. So the Khopesh wasn't able to sever anything, as you can tell. Didn't hack anything clean off. But what you can see here, oh, no, ma'am, I need your back. So what you can see is that it inflicted massive cuts on the back of the neck, back of the shoulder, because the curve of the blade drives it in. See, it just pushes itself in. But the weight of the blade makes it difficult to actually decap. Now, again, this was from early Bronze Era Egypt, if I remember correctly, meaning that surgery was not great at the time. These deep cuts, while not an instant kill, as you saw, she was still alive on the ground for a bit, they're going to bleed out. They're done. There's nothing they can do to heal that. All right, and it's because of that fact that this weapon was such a nasty bit of work. So, next up on the docket, this bad boy. Now, this, again, best of both worlds, got that inside curve and the outside curve going. But I got a lot of weight behind the cut, hence why that was over in a single chop. One swift chop to the shoulder. As you can see, it hit at the bottom of the bell. and pushed it into the main part of the curve right here on his shoulder. He done. That's his collarbone. That's the majority of the arteries in his neck. Now, just to prove a point, I'm just going to get him right here on the bell of it. All right. That's bad. There we go. That's what I was trying to do. If I get it right on the bell of it, you see by the extra red now, that takes it right off because it carries the weight through that curve. But most of these swords, I hear you saying, Jake, most of these weapons you displayed are all outward curves. What about the inward curve, like that Falx you were talking about? Anybody who's seen my live streams knows that the Falx is one of my favorite weapons of all time. Same with this Ramdo. They are both nasty bits of work. So I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate real quick how well the Falx can cut. But not only that, I'm going to demonstrate the benefit of the inverse curve at getting around an opponent's guard. All right, we're going to go... bam, bam. This is going to be a chunk of enemies instead of just one at a time, where I'm going to use the Falx to take them down. Now, see how he has his guard up? Boom! That pulled his whole body to the side because it pushed him into the curve. Whoa! I forgot they're coming at me at multiple at a time. See, they hooked. They're hooked with the front of that Falx, and it just pulls them down. They have nowhere to go because that blade's getting them right on the neck. It's getting them right on the face, and it pulls itself into their body. Oh! As you see by the guy who just lost a limb. Whoa! My Falx is caught on her body. Alright, whoa. Gonna just back up here, back up here, back up here. Gotta get my teaching implement back. Come here, folks. It's not coming to me. No! How have you broken my Falx? Ah, there we go. Ooh, get out of there. Alright. One at a time now. See, its tip allows it to reach over his guard into his body, regardless of how he's blocking. Deep cuts to the leg make this a nasty weapon by the Thracians, which can reach over a shield even. See, even when he blocks, it's able to push through. Takes a leg clean off because the leg is pushed into that curve right there. Not a great defensive weapon. It's a little hard to block with. But dang, does it bury itself into the opponent. As you can see, a lot of times I have to pull the weapon back out of them. But because of the curvature of its handle, I'm able to do so fairly easily. Now that tore through his body because it got him with just the tip. See, hit and pull, and it inflicts a cut along the shoulder. Clean through the leg. Clean through the leg. And across the eyes. So yeah. Whoa. Nasty weapon there. As you can see, I was taking limbs all across the board. Because it's especially easy to take a leg because it can get caught in that curve of the blade there and just get pulled off the body. There's nowhere to go but off. You just got to get them right in the bell there, and they just come right off. And that's what makes these Falx, these other outward curved weapons. Well, I've got some fresh corpses. Come here, Ramdo. As long as you get their head right in the bell curve. Aw, hold still. Oh, I got her arm instead. Dang. Yeah, you got to get them right in that curve and pull as you cut. And usually it just takes the head right off. It's not. There we go. Takes a little practice because my tracking ain't exactly great. I am planning to upgrade that, but I don't know when. There we go. That was a good one. Yeah, this is just getting morbid. Anywho, so yeah, now you see the benefit of curved weapons against our unarmed assistants, or unarmored assistants. The next lesson plan will be piercing weapons and how they benefit against armored opponents. Now, granted, there is some armor that not any piercing weapon can really get through. The knights in this game have plate mail on. Anyone from here has plate mail on? Just survive. You survive against 8 knights hunting you at once. Interesting. And because of that, we're not going to be able to pen it with a lot of different weapons. Not going to be able to pen that plate mail. But against an unarmored opponent or a lightly armored opponent, like even the bandits would suffer at the hands of the Falks or at the hands of the farming scythe, the Naganatas, really the axes definitely would be able to go right through a bandit. But piercing weapons were better at that. Also, against chainmail, slicing weapons had a very big disadvantage. And I'm not talking no dollar store butted chainmail. I'm talking the riveted shit, the real shit. That stuff could easily stop most of these bladed weapons. The reason I say most of is because the Falks was infamous for going through the chainmail used in the loricas worn by the Hastati, the Roman dudes, so they had to invent the Armored Legion, which used a very early form of plate. Thank you, everybody. Class dismissed.